Music for All is proud to sponsor Bandstand. At Music for All, we're about providing positively life-changing experiences. Join us with your marching band at Bands of America or with your concert ensemble at the Music for All National Festival. Students can audition for our honor ensembles or attend camp at the Music for All Summer Symposium, featuring the Sweetwater Director Academy, an amazing week of professional development for directors led by Dr. Nola Jones. Learn more at musicforall.org.
Romeo Music is the leader in audio, video, music, and lighting technology for educators. With a combined nearly 200 years of experience, Romeo Music's subject matter experts understand the struggles that face teachers in today's music classrooms. With a laser focus on educational technology, Romeo Music provides a turnkey solution, everything from audio cables to on-site training. To learn more, visit www.romeomusic.net.
Hello, and welcome to Bandstand, the official podcast of the Tennessee Bandmasters Association. I'm your host, David Aydelott, and I hope you'll join us on a journey through the past, present, and future of bands in Tennessee. We'll delve into the rich history of Tennessee bands, uncovering the hidden gems and legendary figures who shaped the state's band landscape. We'll survey the present, where you'll meet the movers and shakers of today, gaining insights from their expertise and experiences. And we'll gaze towards the future, exploring the exciting possibilities that await Tennessee's school bands. Hello everyone, this is David Aydelott, and today's episode is part 2 of Designing for Marching Band with Dr. Nola Jones and Jordan Lalama. I believe these episodes about designing for marching band have been full of really beneficial information. But I also think that there are some gaps here, particularly when it comes to designing for small bands. I want you to know that we're planning some episodes that may relate more to the music side, and especially in terms of how to design for small bands. So I hope you enjoyed today's episode, and I hope that you'll look forward to episodes like this in the future. Thank you. I want to go back to the angry thing a minute ago, too. I think sometimes this happens, maybe I'm generalizing with a lot of the young designers, that they don't always look at band the way the people in the stands at the football games look at band. They generate this sort of like angry emotion, and they overhype that, and they give it 4 Red Bulls before the show starts and that sort of thing. And that may appeal within our little silo of the marching arts to a certain degree, but the guy that owns the Ford dealership down the road probably doesn't respond to angry high school kids on a Friday night. And so consider how it looks from the outside. When I first started teaching, you do the band pictures at the end of like when the show's over and you go get in the stands and Jolish takes the pictures, and I marched drum corps. And so, I was like, nobody smile, we have to all frown or whatever. And at one point I just thought, the kids don't look like they're having a great time. And so if I put this picture up on the wall, I want it to look like the children are enjoying themselves. So then it became everybody smile, because you want the optics from the outside to look like it's an inviting activity, a thriving, energetic place for young high school students to grow and develop. So just consider how it looks from the non-band person's perspective.
Well, and we're getting philosophical, but there's the pragmatic part of it too. That's not to say you can't have a section in your program, because life has moments where we're angry. We've all been through things recently that make us angry in our personal lives as part of the human existence. But 9 minutes of angry with 15-year-olds might not be, without the pain and without the suffering, we don't get the beauty and the joy and the respite. And effect is all about contrast and variety. So that's not to say you can't do that. It just means the whole 9 minutes might not be the wisest choice. And then to Jordan's thing about playing well, if you only have 30 wind players, then picking a piece of music that requires a real dense scoring with multiple things going on at the same time might not be the best choice. If you really only have enough low brass players for there to be 1 or 2 lines in your scoring. So those are things that while you're listening to it on the earphones, you may think, well, this sounds great. This will be awesome. This is great pacing. but does it fit the band? And that's kind of taking that philosophical up from the 30,000 foot level down into in the weeds. And as a band director,
Mhm.
you have to go up and down. You're going up to the 30,000 foot level and then back down in the weeds. And then you're coming up to view the landscape, and then you're going back down constantly. And that's one of the things that makes it so challenging.
When I think too, like to like the angry point and all that is what I have found, especially and I think to an extent sometimes I still make this mistake, but I catch it quicker, is that most of the shows that you create, you're not going to provide the same feeling to the audience that you got when you first thought about it. So like I listened to this Evanescence song and man, like I'm just feeling angsty and moody and blah blah. It's like that's probably not going to happen to the mass because you're listening to whatever song in your headphones and maybe it's like 6 a.m. in the morning and you're kind of in your feelings and now you're translating it on a 100-yard football field. Well, how do you translate it? Because the one thing, and this is kind of goes I think to the next thing that we're going, like inspiration and stuff like that, is the marching band medium is unlike any other medium. So you can find inspiration from a Broadway play, a movie, a TV show, but then you have to think about the level of nuance and detail that those mediums can provide, and you just cannot provide them in marching band. And so if you're using those things as a basis of inspiration, you have to get to the point to know that they are not going to give the same feeling that you get. Man, when I saw Elphaba fly up and wow wow wow, and she did her thing, it's like, yeah, but do you realize how much dialogue built to that moment? How much like her and the relationship with Glinda and all of that against the wizard, and you just can't really do that in marching band. You have to show things on a 100-yard football field in these very clear and concise visual imageries. So it's not that being inspired by Broadway or any of that stuff is bad, but you have to be realistic with the medium that you're working in. And I think any of the mistakes that I have made especially when I was younger, was doing that. It's like, man, I'm feeling this right now, and I'm going to get everybody else to feel this right now. And it 0% of the time worked. Some of the worst things I've ever done were based on that feeling, and so I'm like, okay, never again, you know? Um, so, if you're feeling angry, cool. But, like you're not going to make everybody feel angry. They're just going to be like, what is this?
Mm-hmm. Okay, so what October problems can be solved in March with the decisions that band directors make early on?
The most important thing is that they be memorable. When you go to critique, you're trying to find out what does the judge remember about the band, good, bad, or indifferent, and being memorable when you're being compared against 24 other bands in a day, or just for them, for the audience members. Oh, they're the band that did dot 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 the Umbrellas, you know, they're
Yeah.
the band that did Lucy. People remember that stuff, and so
Yeah.
being memorable and not homogenous. If you're just using other bands' programs as a template, then you're not they're not we're not creating our own identities.
So I think number one, like one of the things that I, had brought up earlier was, ordering things on time. You know, you have to understand that every design costuming company has some sort of timeline in what they do, whether it be band uniforms, color guard uniforms, flags, whatever. And a lot of just those competitive problems, happen when the whole guard is wearing their black outfits, and you don't really get to see the depth of the show. Well, that's an October problem that if you don't solve by June, I mean, it's going to be a forever problem. So that one's big for sure. But I think a lot of the problems that we have in October, uh, what I would say overall, can't be dealt with in October.
Mm-hmm.
They have to be dealt with from a design standpoint in January to March, but then from like a proficiency standpoint, how are you playing? How are you marching? How are you doing the nuts and bolts of it? Those have to be developed through the systems that you have in place to get you there. And I think without a strong system, you know, uh, you find yourself in October asking these questions. And unfortunately, there's not a quick fix to being excellent. that is a long process. And so if you don't start those things, if you don't start your systems, have a clear plan, a clear teaching plan, and a clear design plan throughout the things, October's too late. Now that I think that there are October problems that come up that you can deal with, but I think most of the October problems that we're talking about, if you don't start early on them, you're kind of putting lipstick on a pig, if that's a good Southern
You nailed it.
thing for
you
y'all.
nailed it. Absolutely, really proud of you for that.
So there's that 30,000 foot level, and there's the in the weeds level. And so the two words that come to mind are we memorable, and are we fundamentally sound? Do we have the fundamental training to achieve the thing that's going to make us memorable? And if it's theater, if you're hanging your hat on that being memorable theatrically, if you're hanging to absolutely, Jordan, we all need to play better. There's no way to play, to reach that goal ever. As musicians, we're always aspiring to play better. So that's a given. But do we have the fundamental training to achieve what we're being asked to do? And what are we hanging our hat on that we're going to be memorable, so that we're not just a replica or a derivative of something else that we've seen? It's okay to take inspiration from source material. And, guess what? When we go to New York and see Broadway plays, that's deductible as a and as a band director. So take inspiration from source material. There's no bad music, there's no bad theater, there's no bad dance, there's no bad movies that you can take inspiration from. But those two things would be the ones that, just based on the number of bands that we see and that we remember, when an audience says, "Oh, they're the band that did," and they know, you've achieved at some level. We've achieved at some level. The kids have achieved at some level.
Yeah, and I think too, David, you and I were kind of talking before, we started recording, but I had a funny anecdotal, thing, like when I was in high school, about a group that we were competing against, and they were like, "Well, don't worry, next week is when we sprinkle on the GE." And as a kid, I thought that was hilarious, but now as an adult, I don't understand what that means, because I don't think you get to October and are like, "Hey, we're going to sprinkle this GE on right now." It's like it is a long process, and so what I would say is, there needs to be a clear plan in place of where you're going design wise. But I would also say, if you can, allow room for your show to breathe into something maybe you haven't thought of yet. So like for me, like you know, to like Nola's point, things need to be accessible. Does that necessarily mean that you need to understand everything? Not really, because I don't think that's on the sheets. Like, understanding isn't on the sheets, but coordination is. And accessibility to the moments being coordinated is. And I think that if you allow your program to have room to change in the moments in August and September, then you're not really thinking about an October problem. You are building your show to where it is optimized. Mm-hmm. It's like, yeah, we had this original idea, but now like the drill was written in a way that we could kind of get in there, massage the moment a little bit. But I think stuff like that starts again in the beginning. It's like, okay, we have this music written, but there's no space in the music to do anything. The whole band's playing the whole time. It's going to be really hard to create maybe something different if that's not exactly working. So I think that you need to go into design with knowing that there needs to be a little bit of space in here to mold this into the best thing that it can be. Not just a good thing, but the best thing that it can be. And I think that if you do that, a lot of those October problems aren't as big because you've been able to mold it. You've been able to massage it in a way that now it is the thing that is the best, and maybe not exactly the thing that you originally thought it was going to be, which is okay.
And to use a literal example, of what I think I'm hearing. I don't want to put words in your mouth, Jordan, but let's just say you open up a score to a master work. Michael Cesar used to say, this is not a 45-minute symphony. It's an 8-minute marching band. But even if you open up a 45-minute symphony of Mahler or whoever is your favorite composer, you're not going to see 8 minutes where the score looks exactly the same in terms of the amount of ink on the page. And that's kind of a visual representation of the horizontal orchestration. And that's what creates effect. And if it's all 2D band, or if it's all around this woodwind quartet, and they may be all state kids and the best kids in the program. There was a really effective marching band from Texas this year that had a solo clarinetist who just crushed it. But that person was not the focus of the show for the entire 8 minutes. That person came in and out, and it was a surprise. And then one time they would be with a duet, and they mixed it up a little bit. I do believe in having things be somewhat organic and leaving space, but I also think that sometimes young designers and young teams of creators, when we get into where the rubber meets the road, it's easier to come up with another idea sometimes than it is to implement what we've pledged our troth to. And then we end up not necessarily getting where we want to be by the end of the season. So there's, again, as the director, we're walking that fine line of balance in terms of organic, being able to massage and make edits versus not doing our homework or getting sidetracked because of the noise around us. That's the challenge. That's where the people who have the experience, and sometimes it's good to bring another set of ears in. It's good to go somewhere and get input from other people before you get to this place. Take your teams. There are all kinds of places you can go. I won't do a commercial plug, but it's fairly easy to find places where you can go to get help with this, and they're not extravagantly priced, and it's an investment in your students' success professionally.
I saw two bands this past year that both had similar situations related to pulse and the staging of percussion. And one band made a change in their staging between September and October, and that was the key that unlocked their future. And they just, from that point, got so much better. And the other band kind of remained a little stubborn, and they were sort of limited in terms of what they can create from a music ensemble standpoint. So I love that idea of the organic nature of making wise decisions once it becomes children on their dots between yard lines and not just ideas on a sketch pad.
100%. Well, in the business world, they call it return on your investment. And so you have to be a CEO to some extent to say, is the return on this investment, is the juice going to be worth the squeeze here? And I'm just not sure many times that, if we're married to that environmental challenge in that one place, are we really going to get the credit for the number of hours? Or if we had those 12 hours of rehearsal time that we worked to get that transition fixed, could that have been invested wiser somewhere else? I mean, if we could read the stock market, we'd all not have to worry about any of this. But it's a return on your investment, and you have to be the CEO to make that decision. We do. The other thing, we get bogged down into that, and we don't make plans based on what the by the ways, and that we have to plan for. There's going to be a week where we just are going to get rained out 4 rehearsals in a row. The closer flags at some point are not going to get there, no matter when we ordered them, because the fabric is on a boat from China. They're just the inevitable things happen that we can't anticipate. And have we built time in for that so that we're not all frantic? Because when we get to hair on fire mode, our students don't succeed.
That's exactly what I was going to say, and it, not as eloquently as Nola said it, but I think for me, and I think that you can look at this at any level of neighborhood, that band that you're in. The way that I would look at like the situation you brought up, David, like with the drum line changing so that the timing, linear, front to back, whatever is better. I always try to look at, like, when we're in October, like, where are the points? Because I am thinking, as a program coordinator, I care a lot about music education, but I also care about competition a lot, because if I don't, I get fired, right? So So I'm always thinking, where are the points here? And here's what I think some people do. I think some people would say restaging that drum thing is a waste of time. But when you look at it in relation, you can call it ROI, return on investment, or whatever. But when you look at it in the relationship, say like, okay, if we hold it in here, how many points are we getting? If we change it, how many points are we getting? And I think too many times people look at those October things and don't pull the trigger because they're not thinking in point structure. And that can be in any box that you're in. That could be low box 3 taking you to higher box 3. You're talking fighting for tenths to win Grand Nationals. It doesn't matter. It's all relative. But, when you get to those problems, because let's be honest, and David, you have been a band director for a long time, and a lot of different of those, degradations of box 2, 3, 4, and 5, there's always going to be problems in October. You can never there, like Nola was saying, there's going to be rain, closer flags, whatever.
Yep.
Even design problems, there's always going to be things that can be optimized, that can be better. And so, ROI, where are the points? Those are the conversations that you need to be having, at the end. And hopefully, that all goes back to what we were talking about earlier. Like, it makes the students' experience way better.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we changed that drum thing. That might have taken us 2 hours to redo that, but man, the students feel way more confident playing now with that backbeat behind them, or being, to the, pitch center, or timing center, or whatever. So I think basically, to wrap that up, in my thing is that when you get into those October problems, look at it like it's all good, and meet them head on. It's not a freak out mode. Everybody's going through them, but think, what is the best thing to do? What's the next right step? As people like to say right now, and just do it. Because that's kind of what it's about as you're moving to that end of the season, from a design standpoint.
And wouldn't you say, would I don't want to assume, but wouldn't you both say 9.9 times out of 10, the right decision is what's going to make us sound better, what's going to make us play better?
Yeah.
Versus how we're going to get that solo flag dancer down front. We're going to rewrite this whole thing to make that moment happen, or is it what's going to make us sound better?
Because that affects everything. If the kids in the horn line don't play together, then how do the kids in the color guard do choreography? Like, how do they know what their checkpoints are if they don't know if the tempo is not solid?
And we could paint 100 scenarios of examples of where the melody's in the back of the field and the percussion stage down front, or all these things. But you just have to analyze. We have to analyze what's going to be the return on investment and what's going to make the kids play the best.
Yep.
And I think too, once you get to that point of the season, people are going to be, from a competitive standpoint, people are going to be less and less forgiving if you're not playing well. Obviously, if you're in, the beginning of September and you have this double tongue feature that isn't crisp articulated, but you can tell that they play with a good sound. Like, okay, like, where that's going to be. But eventually, it kind of goes to the point that I said, like, if you don't play well, that is going to affect every single sheet. And if you don't play well, it's going to affect them every single thing negatively. I kind of always talk about, like, if you guys have seen O, right? And in Vegas, the Bellagio, Cirque du Soleil show, like, some of the best visuals of all time. It's incredible. Can you imagine if the soundtrack to that would be that bad recorder player? Like, it would ruin the whole. It would, like, take the same visuals, take the same thing. It would ruin everything. And that's how I feel about marching band sometimes, is that you look at these things and there's a lot of effort that goes into costuming, props, work, but then you just don't play well, and that's the only thing. Because it's taken me a long time to realize this, but you really do see what you hear. You do. And it doesn't necessarily work the other way around, and I don't know why. But you don't hear what you see, but you do see what you hear, which, as a original visual person, take that with the grain. Like, I'm saying, you by that point, you got to play well, because it affects literally everything.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, Jordan, two things. One is,
Yep.
let's agree now that we're not going to encourage gratuitous double tongue features anywhere in anybody's program that are just jammed in there for the sake of saying that we did it. Okay?
There's some people that need to hear that more than
That's
others,
what
but
I'm
yep, I'll
saying. I
agree
just
with
want to
that.
be clear that we're
Okay,
establishing
guys,
that
you can
up.
stop talking about me now.
Right.
It's fine. I get the point.
And the
Yeah.
same thing with chromatic clarinet features. If they're not, we can put those in the same box.
I think we need more soprano sax features, is what I think.
No, we can talk about that too.
Okay.
I think there were 17 at semifinals this past year.
Yeah,
I
18,
remember
I think,
two
yeah.
of them. And I'm going to leave it at that. No, you probably need to edit that out, David. The second thing that maybe we need to talk about is you touched on it a little bit, and we may be taking a hard left, but the use of set pieces and set design and all those things. When we're designing our program, we need to think about how much rehearsal time is going to be given up. I think the drum corps are figuring this out too, that if the drum corps is having to lose a lot of rehearsal time in South Texas to get those set pieces out there, they want to be sure that the return is on the investment. And that's before they have to get another 53-foot tractor trailer truck to carry those. So just making decisions about how much rehearsal time are we going to have to give up and toward what end. And just making sure that it's really going to be worth it. Nobody says you have to build the Grand Canyon to be successful in marching band. We don't. We just need to be memorable. We just need to have great pacing. So we've sculpted out what the audience is going to react to, a variety of emotions every 45 seconds, probably closer together now, because we're the tech generation and we have less of a attention span.
Mm-hmm.
And making sure that we plan those things.
Sorry, I was just grabbing the general effect visual and music sheets from my wall, which are posted on my whiteboard, and that's how I design while looking at these little babies. No, you guys can't see that, but I wanted to have them in front of me if that's where we were going. And I don't see props on the visual effect sheet, by the way.
Well, and we don't even have production value on our sheet. It's baked in, but we don't even have production value on our sheets, and some other organizations do.
I think that the interesting things about the sheets is, you have, and I think this is the only sheet that has them. If you look on the back of the effect sheets for BOA, because I don't know how TBA is, but it's the only sheet that has coordination. Coordination is the only word that's on there twice. And if you look at any other sheet, music sheet, individual, there's no other word that's on there twice like coordination is. So I think when you're thinking about prop usage or you're thinking about costuming, the question is, are the props cool? Maybe. A lot of times not. But are they coordinated into the entirety of the idea, and does it make the idea come more alive? Because if it doesn't, then I would say don't really even waste your time on props, because it only helps if it is fully coordinated within the idea and with what's happening on the field. And if it's not, then you are, I would say, wasting money. And I'm saying, I love props and I love electronics, and I do think that bands, and some bands more specifically, I guess, but bands just in general, have the responsibility to continue to progress this, whatever that means in their own contexts. And so I think the use of props can be great. But if you're going to use props, read the back of the TBA sheet, read the back of the BOA sheet, or whatever sheet that your final contest is going to be, and say, does it make sense within coordination and staging of elements? Does it make sense of pacing of effects? Is it creative? Is it imaginative? Is it original? Because they give you the rubric. BOA has given the rubric. TBA has given the rubric. Guys, this is what we're looking for.
Yep.
And I'm not saying that you have to use it to be like a derivative of creativity, or whatever, but if this is what I'm being judged on, they've given you the answers to the test. And it's amazing to me the amount of people, band directors, visual people, color guard people, that have never read the sheets. That's crazy to me. They give it to you. So before you make these big investment decisions, costuming, props, whatever, does it align with what's on your rubric that people are going to give you your number on?
Yep. Well, we're hearing coordination, so let's just talk about it. How do directors achieve a well-coordinated show?
Well, there's coordination of the musical elements, and then there's coordination of the music and the visual. And Jordan spoke to that a little bit earlier about seeing what you hear and hearing what you see. Through time, how are the musical elements coordinated with each other, and how are the musical elements coordinated with the visual? That's what coordination means. Effect is when there's good pacing and variety of those coordinated elements, and the performers are able to elevate those qualities through time.
Can you give a couple of examples, maybe a music and a visual, either one of you, about something that's not well coordinated?
Okay, so here's a big one that I have seen a lot is you have this really awesome drill move, right? I mean, like this like crazy geometric, the whole band is doing this whole drill move, and they think that in and of itself is effect. But to me, it's not effective if it's not working in line with everything else that's going around the field. So if you have like this crazy movement of the band that's just going wild, and on the other side of the field, it's juxtaposed with the color guard going crazy with their flags, you have now created so much crazy on the field that they don't really complement one another. So I see like a lot of drill riders who are like riding these intricate moves, and they're wondering why they don't get credit for it. It's because the whole doesn't make sense. Like, that is neat. Really great job writing all that mathematical, but it does not work as a whole because it doesn't complement what the color guard's doing. It doesn't complement the staging of the props. It's not contoured maybe to where the props are. If the props are in an arc and you are very angular, you are not setting up a global perspective of that. You are counter contouring, the visual moment. So I see that one a lot, and people wonder why they don't get credit effect wise. It's because it's not really effective. It's just cool in and of itself. And they all need to work together for it to reach, I think, like a box 5 effect moment there.
The most obvious musical coordination of the musical elements issue typically is writing for percussion and winds. So many times we don't necessarily coordinate those moments musically, and it's not just simple as saying drums play softer, but a lot of times, and it goes back to considering the arena that we're going to be in at the end of the season. If it's inside, it's going to be different. If we have 2D bass drums, a lot of the time that's going to especially in a smaller ensemble. If we have a smaller band, it's going to overplay. Avon is a beautiful example of that. He has 100 battery percussionists on the field at any given moment, and never ever do they not play musically or overpower the rest of the ensemble. Sometimes we, in our attempt to be creative with the use of soundscaping and electronics, there can be a dichotomy that's not always well coordinated. So just making sure that we've planned these effects and that they're all related. Michael Cesario also used to say that it's not that whip and drill move that made the audience stand up and scream. It's how we got into that musically and visually, and how we get out of it that keeps us feeling fulfilled. So, those are all things that we have to consider.
That's a way better way of saying what I was trying to say, but Cesario always does it. He's undefeated.
I see sometimes with bands, just again, judging here a lot this past year, is it looks like they need to have a staff meeting. It looks like the adults need to sit down and say, okay, these 4 measures need to be percussion heavy. These 4 measures, it just needs to be one snare drummer with a rake while the woodwinds are playing a melody. Just those kind of conversations that lead to a musical score that works together, that contributes something to the greater whole, as opposed to everybody kind of fighting for their own airtime within the musical performance.
Yeah.
Well, and I think not every musical transition needs to be percussion.
Oh my goodness, thank you. Would you say that about 17 times, please?
I think that's like one of those big things where it's like, like we have to transition to something else. We have to use the percussive elements. And some of the best groups that I have ever seen get creative in the way that they lead a musical idea into the next musical idea, and it doesn't take you out of it. I feel like sometimes battery and front ensemble take you out of the moment, and really, we should be thinking about coordinating minutes, not moments. So if we're coordinating minutes of the show, then I've never left you. Like I'm here with you the whole time, instead of, oh, you just took this left turn and now you're bang banging the drums, and they're like, okay, well, I guess if you're saying, oh, clearly that's transitional, that's probably not good. And I think transitions at the highest level too, that's what makes you great. Like the big moments, people are getting pretty good at cultivating big moments. But can you transition in a way that's not really a transition, but it's coordinated to the whole of the idea? And it's harder, it's easier said than done, or like everybody would be really good, but that's a difficult thing to do.
Well, and don't we agree that our goal should be that we can't even identify transitions? It's all part of the
Yeah,
compositional process.
exactly.
This could be a segue, or we could be dovetailing, but there's no obvious transition. Oh, we've got to. That's when it becomes artistic versus functional, or you know, it's a tool rather than art. I'm paraphrasing, but what was Michelangelo's quote about? It's not it's what you take away from the marble that leaves the.
If you're looking to me or Jordan for the answer to this, I'm not sure you're going to get it. But
Okay,
I haven't watched the Ninja Turtles in a while,
try,
so I'm not
to,
exactly sure what you're talking about.
Was it Michelangelo that said, it's the marble that you take away that creates the work of art. And sometimes what we chisel out is what leaves the artistic beauty. Coordination also involves focus. In other words, is my ear being led to where my eye is being led? And what else? One of the tricks that Shirley Whitcomb taught me early is watch the video and don't look at where the focus is or where the sound is being created. Look at everything that's happening on the whole field around the whole stage to see what are the things that could be competing with the focus or emphasis. They say in ensemble, focus is a GE word, emphasis is ensemble. So what's competing with that emphasis and focus? You know how you're in a great movie and you're just white knuckled at the edge of your seat, and then all of a sudden something happens that pulls you back and you remember, oh, I'm sitting in a movie theater. So that's interrupted that coordination moment. Planning how we get into and out of, like rotating blocks are fabulous, but they are really hard to get into and out of. And then you have to consider where's the melody in that block. And as it's rotating, where's that melody going in the block? So am I teaching the students how to, if I have the accompaniment and I'm on the second baritone part, now I'm running across the front sideline on that rotating block, am I playing softer than I was when I was in the back of that form? So sometimes coordination can be planning based, or it can be achievement based.
Sure, like during season, right? It's the tweaks that we make to sort of shave back to the Michelangelo sculpting, just to shave a little bit off the side or whatever.
And if the trumpets are doubled on the melody with the mellophones and they're in different zip codes, we may want to consider taking the trumpets off of that or taking the mellophones off of that. Or if the baritones have the melody there and the trombones are in the back of the field, that may be a place where we take the trombones off of that melody and let the euphoniums have that. There are ways to address it that have to do with us. That's that organic part of massaging the program as well. Hopefully the drill writer has the chart and is a musician when they're writing the drill, so that they're considering who's got what, where, when. And Shirley Doherty talks about what are they doing while they're doing it, and what's going on around them while they're doing what they're doing when they're doing it. So
yeah, 100%. I think too, like a good practice for a director, and especially if you are a director that's kind of doing the design yourself, or your in-house staff is doing the design, and even if they're not, this is a good practice to get into, but I would look at every moment of your show first, so as you're going through your rehearsal, and I would say, where's the primary focus and where's the secondary focus? Because I think like with the size of band, if you're getting into like 40 to like 120, a lot of times you'll have primary and secondary, probably not big enough really to get into a tertiary. But if you are, you can apply the same thing. And then I would say, are all of the focuses in this moment working? Is the primary focus the thing that I see and hear the most? And is that secondary focus the thing that's happening over on the side? Is that taking away from the primary? It's as easy as like thinking about like music. Like you want to hear the moving line more than you want to hear anything else, right? At least I assume. Like don't know anything about music, but like I would assume I've heard people say that before. When you're looking at the marching band show, is your primary focus the thing that locks you in the most? And is the secondary focus complementing that? Is it less than that and complementing that? Or is that overtaking that moment? Well, if it's overtaking that moment, then we need to make a change. And then when it comes to focus, just a few things to think about that can help you focus, or that can help you set a focus. The three things that I would say, there are more than this, but I would say speed, color, and mass. Is the speed of that moment, that's going to take your eye somewhere. That's going to create a focus. If this goes fast and nothing else on the field is going fast. If there's all of a sudden a pop of color, your eye is going to go there. So you have to make sure that the primary focus has the most pop of color, and this is very like just, basic things, because you can definitely get nuanced with all this stuff. And then the mass, if you have a huge mass of people over on side 2, and then there's a singular person on side 1, weirdly, your focus is going to go over to that singular person because it looks so much different than that. And is that creating a problem between your primary focus and your secondary focus? So I think for me, that's just a practical way that I would talk to a band director and say, hey, when you're on ensemble, your goal is to ensemble this production. And focus is one of the biggest things, that people talk about, because that is really the nuts and bolts of how a show flows and you setting up what you want the audience to see. And if you want them to see it, you want to make sure that they actually do see it and nothing is getting in the way of that.
3 things come to mind on this. Okay. So the focus thing, if you want to really focus to something, if you want to create really strong visual emphasis, put a lot of negative space around whatever that is. If you have say a quartet, a woodwind quartet, staging it down in the front ensemble could be perilous, because so many times we're looking for that ensemble. We hear it. Sometimes it'll come out of it'll pan out of the speakers on the other side of the field even, and we're trying to find those performers. So just making sure that you're led to where the sound is being produced. But negative space is a powerful tool for focus, visually and musically. There was another thing. It is where I figured out multiple events. Visual, primary, secondary, tertiary, which is primary, which is supportive, and which is secondary, but they all relate together. You don't ever have to wonder. And sometimes they may all be equal, but it shouldn't be the 3-ring circus where I feel like if you went to the circus, you had to choose whether you were going to watch the lions and tigers or the trapeze artist. They weren't necessarily coordinated because that wasn't the idiom for that. A beautiful source reference that we can all understand, and I use this a lot in my general effect clinics, is the Carolina Crown, the year they did the Bach Little Fugue. That is in its most organic. It started with that fugue, and then as the trumpet started, and then as the subject was stated, and then the answer came in, those people entered, and then the next people entered, and then Michael Klesch prolongated the end of that resolution in a way that by the end of that, you were just jumping up and down screaming. And it has stood the test of time for how many years now? I don't even remember what year that was. But it's a beautiful study in understanding coordination, audio to visual, and that fugue form that Bach used so geniusly, them visually interpreting that. So if you're wondering what that really means, pull up that video and watch the first 2 minutes of that program. And I think a picture's worth 1,000 words, maybe.
I think also using visual art references are excellent. You use a static painting where there's a clear focus, and then there's supportive images and textures behind that too that are still well crafted, but they're just not the primary thing to look at. So consider that in terms of how you would outline a musical score, where there's a melody and perhaps there's little interjection page turns that happen in the secondary idea.
Mm-hmm. We learn so much when we go to an art museum and we get the headset and we listen to the description of the painting.
Yes.
And what the artist was talking about with the vanishing point and how they use light and how they use focus and the meaning behind it. It just, things start to make sense. There's a great book called Design Basics. I think the author is Lauer. There's an art design book Molly Bang did that just to explain it in its simplest terms. But it's not you just have to do a little thinking about it, a little reading, a little research, and it's fun to learn about that. What is it that we want the audience to react to, and how are we going to make them react, and how are we going to get into and out of those vertical moments? So vertical moments is if when I look at the score, are the flutes playing? Is it just flutes and violins? Is it the whole orchestra? Is it just the cellos? That's the vertical moment. So in marching band, that means, is it just the woodwinds with just the sabers or rifles over there on that side? Is it just that percussion moment? Is it the entire ensemble? And in the vertical moments, who's doing, what are they doing? What are they doing while they do it? And what's going around them while they're doing what they're doing.
Okay, so how do you write that? That's the question. If you're a young band director, how do you create that? How do you get to that point?
With the timeline, like we've picked we've picked our program, we selected our source material, and in the open, I think about it as a grab bag of goodies. You've got form, you've got color guard, you've got negative space, you've got positive space, you've got line, you've got motion, you've got weight, you've got all the color, all of these design tools that you use to humor, which is hard to do, by the way. But you've got all of these things that you can reach into the grab bag of goodies. Go to the well early and often, and go to different wells for your water, so that you're creating effect in a myriad of ways rather than the same way over time. There's emotional, intellectual, and aesthetic effect. Sometimes a specific type of effect resonates with us as human beings. I can tell you, my friends who a certain kind of effect resonates really well with them. But in an ideal world, we'll have a balance of aesthetic, emotional, and intellectual. What effect is necessarily big double swing flags and set pieces the size of the Grand Canyon. Effect is knowing how you're going to control the engagement of the audience through the 8 minutes that you're on the field. And by the way, if your minimum time is 7.5, write 7 minutes and 45 seconds, because while you're teaching and cleaning those extra 2 minutes, that's a lot of negative return on the investment potentially. Very few judges say, "Man, I wish the show was 2 minutes longer." So effect is engagement and controlling the audience through time. And make no mistake, excellence is its own effect. Like, we have to be excellent at whatever we're doing for it to be effective. We compromise the effect if we're not excellent. So just knowing at this point in our program, this is what the audience should be watching. This is what they should be hearing. There should be no cognitive dissonance. And this is what we want them to react to. And this is how we want them to feel. And then ask the questions. Ask all those questions. And then hopefully we'll like the answer that we get. And if we don't like the answer that we get, then we have to do a deep dive to say, why is that not happening? And how do we fix that potentially?
I'm going to be really basic here, I think, and not to be too simple, but like, is it boring or is it not boring? Because I think that the effect sheets specifically are the most subjective, even though there are definitely objective things. But like, when you look at like just pacing, Like, I know people that love to sit down at the Nashville Symphony, right? And just listen to the second Adonde movement of somebody. Where sorry, I'm not doing that. Like, but that guy, if he's judging, he might like those slower moments, those more breathable moments more. So there is a subjective part of that. And I think both slow, both fast, both loud, some people like The Shape of Water. Some people like Michael Bay movies. Like, there's a different understanding of like what people like and what they don't like. I think for me, if I'm just designing, because I want all of those moments. I want the slow moments. I want the moments that you have to lean in, and I want those moments that kind of pop and punch you in the face. What I ask myself is this boring or is this not boring? And then if it is, I ask myself why. Like, why am I bored by this? And then there can be a whole slew, of answers of why this bores me. And I'm not talking about other people's designs. I'm talking about my own designs here, so I'm not ripping on anybody. I'm looking at my own stuff and saying, man, like, this moment just doesn't work, because it's not that it's slow or fast, because trust me, I've seen a lot of double swing flag moments where you put the panels in the back and all the colors great that are just boring. Like, that is not effective, it just because you did that thing.
Yep.
And so I think if you can literally just say, and you have to kind of trust your own gut, but if you're like, man, this is exciting, or man, like, I really had to lean into this moment. Like, Richard Saucedo is the best at those moments, where you
Yep.
lean in and you're just like, oh, wow. That chord has 40 notes in it, and each one is so brilliantly and delicately tuned. Like, that's not like that, it's engaging. I guess that's a better word. Like, is this engaging, or it's not, or is it not engaging the whole way through? That's for me what effect really boils down to, because I can only do my best interpretation, of all of these things on this effect sheet, and me and Nola even might have a difference of opinion on what the pacing of effects is better or worse, which is great. Like, we can all interpret art a little bit different and in our own worldview or in our own site or whatever. But I think you have to start with that, and if it is unengaging, how can you make it engaging? If it's a flute soloist, how do you make the moments that are happening within that flute soloist, like, how do you make me pay more attention? Those are the questions that you have to ask. But again, I would say, like, don't be so hard on yourself, because those things are not super easy. And it's a thing that you learn things more over time. Because again, if they were super easy, then every single band would be incredible, and they're not. Like, not to be mean about it, but like, there's a lot of bands that just aren't really great. So like, it's a lifelong learning of those lessons of what is engaging and what is not engaging. And I'll tell you what, like, a lot of the times on the first shot, I get it wrong. Like, I'm not nailing everything the first time. Most of the time I'm not nailing it on the first try, and you have to try things. And I think our capacity to continue to look at every moment, every minute of our show and try new things to optimize those moments, I think that we as designers or directors should feel free to do that, because you're now creating the best product for your students in that.
So how do we create effect through time, and how do we keep the audience engaged? And so we as young designers have to be able to say at any given moment in the program, this is what I want the audience to be looking at. This is what I want them to be listening to. This is what I want them to be feeling. And if they're not, what's causing that? Jordan's flute solo example is a beautiful example of that. This flute player is just virtuosic, playing beautifully, and there's 10 other things that are happening. Sextuplets in the front ensemble,
Mm-hmm.
The clarinets restaging for their moment, color guard going to get their new swing flags, all these things that would pull us away from this beautiful flute moment, rather than amplifying. And I don't mean literally amplifying with sound system, but visually and emotionally amplifying that student's opportunity to engage us. and how many times are we doing it, and how many different ways.
So some good models for pacing of moments. Can we think of some that might be relative that people can relate to? There's the 76 trombones, the men's choir. That's such a wonderfully paced performance. Are there models out there that folks can look to for how do I create a show that is paced musically well?
Well, that Carolina Crown Bach little fugue beginning of that program is like, that was just, to me, standard setting in terms of understanding the fugue form visually and musically. Another really good example is, what was the year that Boston Crusaders did the pentagram year, where they started with that little childlike giggle and the Moonlight Sonata, and it resolved in that big push at the very beginning of that program, is a beautiful example. There's some wonderful marching band examples out there. Some of the smaller bands are just as effective as some
Absolutely.
of the larger bands in terms of how they pace, because they don't have to restage 400 people to make that happen. But also, Jordan's reference to Elphaba, where she flies. Oh, getting out and going to these theatrical productions. They're great movies. The Pan's Labyrinth movie that was Guillermo del Toro, the Pale Man scene. If you just Google that Pale Man scene, is pretty spectacular. The
Yes.
Wizard of Oz, where that goes from black and white to color. That's a great example of music and audio visual coordination in a moment.
The last 4 episodes of season 4 of The West Wing
100%.
is an incredibly paced, from when, I don't want spoiler, I mean, it's been around for 50 years, so who cares, but when the president's daughter gets taken, that build up to that moment, and he used 4 episodes to do it. Like, I think that's a great example of building to a moment. And then you just kind of just get blindsided, like, I think, is it Aristotle, in his Rules of Drama or whatever, he says, like, endings should be surprising, but, like, necessary, or that's not the words he used, but it's like, it's the only possible ending it could have been, but it should be surprising, and so, obviously you're getting, like, into the Rules of Drama, which are not exactly marching band, but, like, I think that if you're a young designer, you can look at the nuts and bolts of really great marching bands or really great drum corps and still not to try to do exactly what they do. So, like, if I was a young band director designing a show, what I would do is I would look at how the Blue Devils transition things. I wouldn't look at, like, what the color guard is actually doing, because you ain't doing it. You know what I mean? Sorry, you're not going to have an ensemble aerial, you know what I mean, going across the field. But, how did they get the flags out here, and how did they set up that moment over there? Those nuts and bolts are very helpful. I would watch any Wes Cartwright show in high school marching band, him or Michael Gaines. I think those are the 2 best transitioners, of equipment, and they both do it incredibly different. But for my money, Wes Cartwright and Michael Gaines are the 2. So any program that they're a part of is also a really good study of eyes and how you transition. And I'll tell you this, like, if you take care of your transitions, you're going to be better than a lot of bands. Like, even bands that are better than you, that's going to be more effective, because, again, I'm engaged, and what I would say is, don't get like depressed, or don't get discouraged if you have a smaller band, because if you do some of these principles better, the really good judges are going to see it, because a lot of big bands are smoke and mirrors. And a lot of good judges can look at that and say, okay, like, great, that is great, but wow, this little band, like, they have the fundamentals of design in that show. And the really good ones are going to let you know, so keep fighting that good fight, like with you, and don't get discouraged, be encouraged that, and I'll say this too, and this isn't really a plug for BOA or TBA or for NOLA, but the judges, and it took me some time to get here as I matured. The judges want what's best for you. They want to cheer you on, for the most part. I'm sure there are some that are terrible, but for the most part, they are applauding you.
Yes.
They want you to be great. So take all the feedback that you can from them as well, because from what I have experienced, it's been nothing but helpful when I have looked for help.
You have to be a little bit vulnerable, and you have to not assume that you should be the greatest designer ever in your first year. You have to sort of get yourself in perspective and seek that growth, just like you would if you were getting ready for a concert festival and you're bringing in someone like Nola to help you and help your group grow. It's being vulnerable, it's seeing the long term, and just understanding the long term process of it.
Some of the things to consider when you're talking about programming, um, how you say hello and how you say goodbye are critical. You're going to pick that
Yeah.
concept, but a memorable beginning and a memorable end, that doesn't give us license to go in the middle and just be any kind of marching band that doesn't relate. The best bands are the ones who can say hello and goodbye in a very memorable way and then stay married to that concept for the 6 minutes in between the beginning and the end. But go watch every ending of a program that Wes Cartwright has ever done. Go watch the ending of any program that Scott Chandler has ever done. Go watch the ending of any program that Michael Gaines has ever done. They get you from hello and they still have you at goodbye. So the way we really need to think about that as young designers, how we're going to say hello and how we're going to say goodbye. Shirley Whitcomb used to say that's 25% of effect. But
Mm.
and then in the middle, you have to stay married to that concept. We can't just drift off into something else. But I think that's really tangible, and that's something that young designers and young band directors can use and grab onto. That's maybe not quite so nebulous.
I was at a clinic at Midwest a few years ago, and it was Eric Whitaker and John Mackey, and they were talking about their experiences at Juilliard and what they learned from John Corigliano as their composition teacher. And the way they learned was that if you're going to write an 8-minute piece, that you map out, I want this to feel this way, I want this to feel this way, I want 30 seconds of this, I want 30 seconds of this. You make sure there's continuity all the way through, just like you would if you were, writing a literary work. That's what you do first. Then you go back and do the easy part, which is fill in the notes.
Well, a lot of it has to do, kind of related to that, like just mood in general.
Yeah.
It's like what is the show? Like, I am so much more interested in understanding the mood of the show than I am understanding the show. Because it's like I do think that you have to have a proof of concept, and it has to be immediate. You have to know what the proof of concept that you're doing is, but that doesn't mean that you have to understand everything. I think one of the best marching band shows of all time is that 2012 Broken Arrow show, and that was before I started working there. But you know, I think if you try to understand every aspect of that show, you're not going to, but you get it. You know what I mean? Like, you get what that show is, and it's all based on mood. And I think what that show did, and I'll simplify this, if you're a young designer, young director, not to go back to Aristotle again, but like he said that good drama has a beginning, a middle, and an end. And I think if you simply look at a marching band show and said, we need a great opener, we need to end memorable, and the ballad needs to be gorgeous. If you just do those three things, you're going to be good. And then, like, maybe just think of, like, kind of like what you were talking with Whitaker and Mackey and them, you fill in the other stuff with some compulsory stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Because as much as we want to be artists, and our art matters so much to us, like, there is compulsory stuff to marching band. Like, you have to have a woodwind feature. Sorry. You know what I mean? Like, you have to have a brass feature. You have to show off the fact that these instruments can play and give a good variety and give the judges an understanding that, yes, all elements of your band can play. But man, if I have a great beginning, an impactful beginning, and I have a gorgeous ballad, and I have a memorable ending, and then the rest of my connective tissue is compulsory, that seems like a pretty good equation to get started.
Yes.
And there's 1,000 different nuances, and then you can argue the Blue Coats versus the Blue Devils, Carmel versus Broken Arrow versus whatever.
But we're talking about the young teacher in Tennessee and how they get started with this process. Yes.
Yeah. So just maybe start there and then see if you can't, year by year, make it a little bit more, what you want it to be. But I think that's a good place to start. And even that's kind of where I start still to this point. I'm like, am I going to be bored by this beginning? Like, do I want, like, I, Marie Chapinski, I heard her say a long time ago that the ending is 60% of the show. Like, I don't know if that's exactly true, but again, I make it a thing not to argue with Marie Chapinski. Like, she's one of the greatest ever. So, like, okay, well, if you tell me the ending is 60%, then I'm going to care a lot about that ending. And to like Nola's point, like Wes Cartwright endings, like those are some of the most memorable things. So it's like, okay, like it's clearly important. So
Yep, that '07 LD Bell band changed my life. I mean, I've known you all both for so long, but I'm still just here thinking how fortunate I am to have you in my life, so I can learn from just what we're saying on this podcast. It's great. So thank you so much.
Well, hopefully it's tangible and something that young directors can hear.
Well, and also how do we frame their expectations so they're not expecting to be Mike Pote their first year? So they can see, like, if I can just do this year, this incremental growth from this year to this year and this year, survive, produce a product that your kids are happy with, get kids to sign up for band next year, that's your expectation, not win Guardian Nationals the first year.
There's also so many resources now that weren't available, even like when I started teaching, which, like in 2008, or 9 or whatever, like now, like you can literally get on YouTube and there's some, even if they're not like the greatest teacher in the world, right? I mean, like there's some good information, good truth from anybody that's speaking,
Yep.
Like the dynamic marching thing, Jeff Young's thing, is a really cheap way to start building a system.
Yes.
Visual system, so, I, at one point it's like, I don't want, the thing that I saw, especially at Summer Symposium sometimes, is like, there are just so many directors that are just like beaten down a little bit. Noah, did you see any of that ever? Like, and I just don't want them to be beat down. It's like, guys, like, so if you just like keep your chin up and keep going, like, and I don't know what the answer to that is, but it's like, man, like even especially the smaller band, it's like, guys, like what you're doing is important, even though I know that there are a lot of challenges.
Thanks for listening to Bandstand. Bandstand's mission is to build a stronger, more unified band community in Tennessee by fostering meaningful conversations about the past, present, and future of school bands in our state. If you have topic suggestions or need to get in touch with us, email us at tbabandstandpodcast@gmail.com. Your input is important to us, and if you have a topic you'd like us to discuss about the past, present, or future of Tennessee bands, please let us know. Again, that email is tbabandstandpodcast@gmail.com. Right now we're broadcasting on Spotify, YouTube, and Apple Podcasts, so please subscribe, review, and rate. Box 5, please. And if you find something interesting or helpful, please share this podcast with your friends. Bandstand is proud to be sponsored by Music for All and Romeo Music. See you next time.